Just push that 10 and then we're ready to go. Right, we're doing anyway.
Kia ora, Christine. Welcome.
Kia ora, Tim, how are you?
Great to have you here. So, Rebecca, Christine, does everyone know Christine? You must all know Christine, don't you? Yeah. Who's running the show, Rebecca?
Yeah.
Right.
So
Run away.
when we put the presentation up as
Yeah.
well. Cool.
Yeah.
So thank you. So today's session is to give you the opportunity to talk to Christine and research that we commissioned for the District Vision Project. So you'll recall last year we put as part of the Better Off funding package, we put in a application to create a 50-year vision for Central Otago. So much broader than the council's mandate, but looking at what is important for the people of this place now and into the future. And so we had an awesome response to that piece of work. We had, we engaged Angus and Associates, and so that then took us down a path which created this beautiful research that we've shared with you, and we're going to talk today. So we partnered with Angus and Associates alongside Lennis at the Pajama Strategist. And this is a stage in the process where it's bringing the research to you, invite a conversation with Christine, who I sort of think of as the hierarchy of the research or the guardian of the research, to ensure that we're honest and honour the research in our next stages. And so after Christine has presented the data, I've got a presentation just to talk about our community outcomes for our long-term plan and how we can then use this data to help inform our long-term planning. So with that as an introduction, we'll hand over, Christine, to you.
Kia ora, Rebecca, thank you so much. And it's fantastic actually to be here now sharing the findings of this research with you. I know that over the many workshops that we ran and the qualitative research that we undertook, having spoken with a lot of people in Central Otago, I felt a little bit of a sense of responsibility to reflect some of what they told us, you know, to make sure that that was actually reflected well in the way in which we communicated this this back to CODC and obviously to others. Now, Wayne, I think you're going to move the slides for me. Thank you. So perhaps if I just...
Sorry, Christine, to interrupt. Our vision of it, people online will be able to get a great visual of the report. However, ours is very small. So just so you know that, and I've just sent Paula off to do some photocopies so that the members in the room can have a look at the... So just know that they can't read the screen very well, but they're about to get a hard copy.
Okay, look, fantastic. That may make some of the slides a little bit challenging to see, but we'll see how we go. And you know, perhaps let me know if you're having difficulty seeing anything. So Wayne, could we perhaps move on to the next slide, just by way of introduction? So the process or the outcomes that I will be talking with you today about came about through a program that we collectively referred to as Shaping Tomorrow Together, and this program was designed really to stimulate conversations about the kind of future that people in Central Otago want, looking 50 years or more ahead. So we were asking people to reflect not just on what they wanted as individuals now, but to think about their children and their children's children in relation to the kind of future that they would like to have for Central Otago, and also the kind of actions that we need to take now to shape that future. I've actually borrowed a quote there from Mother Teresa, but the idea being that really to reinforce the idea that the future that we aspire to begins with the actions that we take today, which I think is a really nice way of thinking forward about everything that we do now will actually culminate ultimately in shaping the future. So, Wayne, perhaps if we could go to the next slide. So Shaping Tomorrow Together was a very comprehensive program of research that was purposefully designed to capture the voices of people from all walks of life, and also with different perspectives. So we didn't want to run this as a kind of collective town hall where people would front up and have their say, but we wanted to reach out to people right across Central Otago and, of different ages, life stages, ethnicities, genders, and so on, to ensure that we were reflecting the broadest possible perspective on Central Otago and its communities. So we were bringing to you effectively the voices of the many communities of Central Otago. So the program Shaping Tomorrow Together involved in-depth qualitative research, and that through that process more than 100 people shared literally hundreds of hours of contribution, and then a larger scale piece of quantitative research, a survey that went out again to a very large group of people. We had almost 500 adults contribute to that piece of research, and through the adults we also reached a fairly sizable group of children. So we had parents and caregivers asking their children to provide input, some of which I'll share with you a little later on. Wayne, the next slide. So we were, and I think I reflected this back to Rebecca and team during the process, but we were quite struck by how enthusiastic people were about the process, and also the thoughtfulness with which they responded. And I'm talking thoughtfulness in its true sense, with real thought and real reflection. So it was also apparent that people were genuinely appreciative of the opportunity to get involved and to have their voice heard as part of this process. And I think you'll see that, well, hopefully you can see that in some of the comments here. So people coming back and saying, thank you for the opportunity to share our thoughts. It's great to see consideration. Can you see that slide all right?
I've just sent it around to everybody.
Okay, cool.
They're not going to be here.
I've got Paula's doing photocopies.
Yeah, okay. But I mean, suffice to say, we did quite spontaneously get a number of comments back from people saying thank you for the opportunity to have their say. And certainly at the end of some of the workshops, we found that people didn't want to leave. So we would finish the formal part of the proceedings, and then people would like to stay and have some more discussion. So I think that there was genuinely a real commitment and an enthusiasm for the process. Next slide. The key questions that we set out to address through this process were really a handful, boiled down to a handful. So why do people choose to live in Central Otago? So what is it that they really value about living in the district? How do they see Central Otago now? And how do they describe the Central Otago they aspire to in the future? So we can really understand the gap, if there is a gap between now and people's aspirations for the future. What are the factors that are fundamental to the well-being of people in Central Otago? On which of those are we doing well at the moment, and perhaps not so well? And then importantly, what are the actions that are needed to improve the well-being of people in Central Otago, both now and into the future? Next slide. And I hope that you can see some of this, but when we ask people why they choose to live in Central Otago, the top 3 factors were for the active outdoor lifestyle, for the natural environment, and for the work-life balance. So it's very much about lifestyle, living an active, healthy life in a beautiful natural environment, balancing work with other priorities in life. There are other factors, of course, the weather and climate, having family and friends living in the region, and many people live in Central Otago for job or business opportunities. Others live in Central Otago for its peace and quiet, for the strong sense of community, and the sense of safety. And some of those factors varied depending upon where people live within Central Otago, but overall, those were the most important factors. Wayne, next slide. We also asked people to choose the words from, we gave a very balanced set of words and asked people to choose, this is in the survey, to choose the words that they felt best described Central Otago now. And they were quite clear that Central Otago is peaceful and safe above all, but also traditional in its values, healthy, changing, evolving, welcoming and grounded. And then rounding out that kind of top 10 were the concepts of Central Otago being remote, simple and conservative. So those were the 10 words that were selected most often to describe Central Otago now. If we whip over to the next slide and look at the Central Otago, the words used to describe the Central Otago that people aspire to. So it's still safe, peaceful, healthy and welcoming, but it is also sustainable, well-planned, affordable, full of opportunity, resilient and progressive. So there's a different flavour there. So some characteristics have diminished and others have come to the fore in people's thinking about the future of Central Otago. So we're going to look at that in some more detail, and this is where it could get a bit complex if you aren't able to see the screen.
Just handing out hard copies now, Christine.
Okay, excellent. So once you have the hard copy, perhaps if you turn to page 9, has everyone got a copy, Bex?
Yep.
Okay, hopefully it will be your page 9. There's a page which lays out a series of words with a vertical dimension, and I'm just going to ask you to look at the vertical dimension and the placement of the words on the page. So you'll see that peaceful and safe are at the top of the page, and that's because those were the words that are used most often by research participants to describe Central Otago. And then at the bottom of the page, you'll see the words sophisticated and spontaneous, and that's because those were the words that were used least often to describe. Yep, so you can see that. So just looking at that vertical placement of the words, then what I'll ask you to do is to turn to the next page, and what we've done is to look at the attributes that are considered more desirable in the future. They're on the right-hand side of the page, and less desirable in the future. They're on the left-hand side of the page. Okay, so for example, on the right-hand side of the page, you'll see safe and sustainable. On the left-hand side of the page, you'll see conservative and predictable. Okay, now if we then whip over to the next page. So page 11. What that allows us to do is to compare where we are now with what people would like for the future, and to focus on the areas of change. So what that tells us is that the attributes people want preserved, so the ones that Central Otago has now that are also important in the future, are peaceful, safe, healthy, welcoming and full of opportunity. So those are things that we have now that it's critical that we preserve, okay, because they're also important in the future. The qualities that are less characteristic of Central Otago now but are important in the future are the ones we want to develop. And they're the ones at the bottom right of the page there. Resilient, thriving, progressive, affordable, forward-thinking, well-planned and sustainable. So those are currently less developed as attributes of Central Otago, but they're critically important in the future. So those are the areas or the attributes on which we want to focus. There are a couple that we've called dial down. So they're things that do characterise Central Otago now, but people don't want to see so much in the future. So traditional values. And also, I guess there's a certain wariness with the pace of change. So you can see there that people are not looking for changing and evolving to be a characteristic that's really desirable in the future, even though they are seeking a progressive, forward-thinking district. So does anyone have any questions about that so far?
I'm still learning stuff each time you talk, Kristen.
That's all good. So we're going to use that same approach when we look at some of the characteristics that are the foundations of well-being for people living in Central Otago. So in the qualitative stage of the research, we asked people what they thought contributed to the well-being of themselves and their families. In the quantitative research, we asked people to tell us which of those characteristics were most important. So in other words, what was it that really underpinned the well-being of people in Central Otago? And if we move on to the next slide, so that'll be page 12. Again, if you look at the top of the screen, you'll see the characteristics that were most important to most people, okay, as the underpinnings of well-being. So those are things like living in a safe and secure place, living in a place that's committed to protecting and enhancing its natural environment, living in a place where everyone can afford to live a satisfying, healthy and fulfilling life. Having access to a healthy natural environment for leisure and recreation, living in a place where everyone is treated fairly and equally, having access to world-class facilities such as healthcare, education and infrastructure, access to affordable housing and affordable day-to-day living costs, feeling a sense of belonging and feeling strong and healthy. So they're all in the kind of top half of the page, and they're there because most people, or the most people, said those were important as contributors to the well-being of themselves and their families. But do remember that everything on this page that you can see is important to some people. It's just that as you get down the page, it's important to fewer people. So this is more people, less people dimension, if you like. If we then move on to page 13, what we've done is to overlay the factors that most and least characterise Central Otago now. So I'm not going to dwell on that. If you now whip over to page 14, we've popped these into 4 quadrants. So the characteristics that are really important to well-being that most apply to Central Otago now are the ones that we want to preserve. So everyone is treated fairly and equally. People have a sense of belonging. They live in a healthy, natural environment. They feel safe and secure. Those are things that we really want to protect and preserve. Over on the top left are the factors that are really important to well-being, but don't apply to Central Otago so much now from a community point of view. So protecting and enhancing the natural environment, enabling people to live satisfying, healthy and fulfilling lives, having access to world-class health, education, infrastructure, and affordability. Those are all factors that are important, but not well developed as far as Central Otago is concerned at the moment. So again, everything here is important. So anything below that kind of horizontal line, it doesn't mean that it's not important, but if we had to pick priorities, it would be everything above the line, okay, as far as what we preserve and what we look to develop. So, okay, we've also overlaid, and I'm conscious I'm asking you to absorb quite a lot here, and there is an opportunity obviously to pour over this in more detail. But if we move on to the next page, page 15, we've also overlaid a view based on the direction of travel, if you like. So are these things getting better or are they getting worse? So what this shows us is that good progress is being made currently on a number of factors that are important to community wellbeing, but obviously we want to maintain and perhaps accelerate that progress. And there are areas that we want to prioritise for improvement, in part because they're important, but also because they seem to be deteriorating at present. So affordability is clearly a big concern at the moment. Access to world-class health, education and infrastructure, and that underpinning, which is about enabling everybody to live a satisfying, healthy and fulfilling life. Okay, so those are the 3 points that really stand out in terms of priorities for focus and improvement. Good transport access and choices, you can see, is kind of sitting alone there in the bottom left quadrant, but I think it still needs focus. So that is still important to a sizable group of people, and it's definitely seen to be getting worse. So that is an area of particular focus in relation to the elements below the line. The ones in the bottom right quadrant, I mean, they're important to some people, but they're also seen to be getting better at the moment, or there's positive momentum in those areas. So really the outlier there is the good transport access or choices. If we now just move on, I've probably asked you to absorb enough of those quadrants, just to focus on, yeah, sorry, Wayne, if we whip on to page 16. We also asked people what actions would be most important in bringing their vision for the future of Central Otago to life. Now, many of these were considered important to varying degrees, but the most important were high quality infrastructure, better access to hospital facilities and services. And I know, Mayor Tim, you've been working on that one. Better access to specialist health services, more choice of affordable housing, regeneration of the natural environment, and then demonstrating leadership both in relation to sustainable energy production and renewable energy sources and in responses to climate change. And interesting that there is that expectation of leadership, and that's quite, both of those are quite high up in the list of priorities as expressed by the community. Now, I'm going to end with some of the thoughts from children, which seems really appropriate since they are the future. And we'll just whip over to the next screen, Wayne. So what children valued. So as I mentioned, the adults who participated in the survey that we ran, those with children aged from 5 to 14, were asked if they could ask their children a few questions, and then they reported that feedback through their survey response. So what children valued was the walkability and the bikeability of Central Otago, their connections to their friends and family and their pets, the range of things that there are to do in the outdoors, which is really interesting because that echoes what the adults told us as well about that active outdoor lifestyle, and also safety, that sense of safety of living in Central Otago. So, it's well in line with what the adults have told us as well. If we move on to the next screen, we asked children what would make Central Otago better for everyone, not just for themselves, but for everyone. And gosh, there was a lot. There were a lot of items mentioned, but I mean fundamentally it was about more things to do and places to go for children and young people, more infrastructure or amenities, more events. A greater focus on the environment, looking after the environment, and the accessibility or access to events and activities. So again, echoes of what the adults told us in there, but with definitely with a nice kind of child flavour. And then if we whip on to the next page, we also asked children what they'd take away to make Central Otago better for themselves and everyone. So what would they take away? Antisocial behaviour, some retailers that they weren't supportive of, bad weather, not much that we can do about that one. Bad people, which is the antithesis of what people value about the community in Central Otago. Negative impacts on the environment, such as pollution and overdevelopment. And there was talk about too many houses and losing access to green or play spaces. And again, that was something that came through very strongly from particularly the qualitative, but also the quantitative work that we did with adults. And that was that idea of protecting that special character of Central Otago, ensuring that green spaces weren't gobbled up by urban sprawl, and maintaining that kind of special character of the communities of Central Otago. So that again was really an echo of what the adults had told us. So Wayne, just on to the last one. There is much more detail in the full report that we've provided, but I hope this does give some useful food for thought, particularly as you move on to the next session, which I know Rebecca is running with you. So thank you, and if anyone has any questions, I'm really happy to answer them now.
Here's your chance, councillors. Questions?
Some observation.
Yeah.
Nothing here really surprises me. the significantly says that you would expect these sort of answers to those sort of questions. And they are fairly broad generalisations. There's really, I mean, what, if anything, is new and that we're learning and learnings we're taking from this?
I
I
think,
think that,
perhaps if I,
yeah, you answer.
perhaps I just,
Yeah.
can I
Just
just make,
making you up for a picture, Christine.
Yeah, where you go, Christine?
sorry,
Go for it.
I missed that. I guess if I just make an observation on that, I would say in some respects, it's probably that might be your reflection because you are of Central Otago. If we put those same questions to people who live in other regions, I know that we would have a different flavour to the responses. And I speak from experience on that. So there were, if we take, for example, the factors that contribute to wellbeing, that there were around about 40 of those that people had an opportunity to consider and weigh against each other. The fact that those have emerged as priorities in Central Otago, I think, is particular to Central Otago. We would have seen some quite different priorities emerge in other regions. So I would be surprised if there was anything in here that surprised you, but what it does do is to confirm really what the collective of the community has identified as priorities. So, yeah, but as I say, it would have been quite a different flavour in other locations, other communities.
Peter, and look, I might just add the point too, is 84% of the respondents didn't grow up in Central Otago, so they're new here. And I guess anecdotally, you would know this, but anecdotally, now we have some pretty rigorous data that supports what you know anecdotally, which gives us the confidence to then be able to apply this going forward. Otherwise, all we're going off, and I wouldn't say it's myth and legend, but this reinforces what you already know around this table. But for people like me who are new here, this gives me a sense of what the community is telling us.
And I've just add to that, Peter, that I think we're so lucky to live here. And some of the stuff that we have, we take for granted. And I think the example that is safety is that how safe we feel here is can be taken for granted. One of my neighbours moved here particularly for safety. And so it's something that we just, it's a useful reminder to the end. And just to Peter's point about using the data, we've used it twice so far. I used it in a meeting yesterday. Not sure what.
Yeah.
And we used it, Tim used it in the health, the health conversations that he's been having.
Rebecca, it's interesting that the figure given here for motivations for shifting here, safety rates is 4%.
Yeah, but it's still, I'm not saying, but it's fundamental to well-being living here. But for motivation for shifting here, it's not top of the list, but it's still like, it's one of my 10.
Yeah, maybe just that people change once they get it.
Yeah.
And just the other stat too, and I've just pulled out, 79% of the respondents arrived after 2000. So
Sorry?
79% of the respondents arrived after 2000. So, the recollection of this place is only 24 years. So, it's just saying that there's a cohort of people that arrived, and this is reflecting their views as well.
Yeah.
So, question from me, and forgive me if I just want to be really clear in my mind. On page 16, and we've got, 20 odd supporting actions.
Yep.
Those supporting actions are essentially a condensation of everything that came in from people were kind of put into appropriate groups. So that's a condensation. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, correct. And it was really, it was a way of crystallizing or making concrete some of the concepts that people had been talking about. So what would that actually mean in terms of the actions that one might take?
And for me, looking at that and influencing my thinking going forward on a couple of factors is there's no heritage, there's no museum, there's no museums in particular. You know, there's designated art spaces, facilities, and maybe that's a condensation that did have some museum in there. But when we're looking at probably an $8 million facility in Cromwell for a museum,
I think
no,
just to speak to that, I had a question recently about heritage and whether this, because I've had the research for a while. I don't think I think it's important to take it alongside other work that we've also done. And so particularly around that point, Tim, was the importance of heritage, and that came through our destination management plan work. And it was quite high in that work. And so I don't think I think this tells a story of our thing, but when you're making key decisions like that, to use all of the work that we've had done, and in fact, Christine, you did that piece of work yourself, so you'll know the importance that heritage came through in that other study. Have you got any particular thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, look, I think that was all part of the story, or telling the story of Central Otago as well. And I think this had quite an inward lens, whereas the destination management planning piece of work also had more of an outward lens in terms of how Central Otago engages with with the visitor audience and the people beyond the district. So I think that also took place at a slightly different time. And I think one point that we need to be really mindful of is that at this particular point in time, I think people are actually quite focused on things like cost of living and those kind of very practical considerations of life right now. And I think there's a little bit of a flavour of that in some of this work as well, that people are actually quite transactionally focused. I think about this as it's almost like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. There are some fundamentals that people have reflected through this work that are really important, but equally we know from that earlier work that stories and understanding of culture and heritage are a really important part of life in Central Otago. So I think to your point, Rebecca, I think they need to be read in conjunction, and just because some of those items are lower in the priority here doesn't mean that they're not important.
So it seems so. For me though, yeah, we will have a cohort in our community that will tell us museums are a sacred cow. Absolutely must support them and whatnot. This, which is created by the people, isn't telling you that. And yes, designated art spaces are important, and cultural endeavours. Yeah. Look, I'm not saying this is the whole story by any means, but I'm saying this is a counterpoint to those people who will come in here and say, by God, if we don't have a new museum in every town that we own, don't own a museum in every town, the world's going to fall on their head. It ain't. Louise, you waving around them figures.
This is just a bit of me way that basically. Just a comment, Christina, maybe I'm missing it, but where's so we've got social and environmental wellbeing, where's the economic wellbeing and those things that, like, obviously without economic wellbeing, communities don't survive, but do people not want to go to have vibrant town centres and go to cafes and have some
for sure. And if you look at some of the attributes, say if you look on page 14, and apologies that it is actually quite small, but in amongst the attributes supporting community wellbeing, there are a number of economic drivers in there. So we talk about business being valued, we talked there about, sorry, my eyesight is actually, I'm having trouble reading my own document, but yes, there were quite a number that are actually reflected in there that relate to jobs and good job and career opportunities or choices, business taking place in harmony with the environment, valuing, embracing science, innovation and technology. Yeah, so there are a number of attributes, and they're just running through the middle of that priority list effectively. So yeah, if you have a look in the report, you'll see all of the attributes are included there, and it speaks to the relative importance of those.
Thanks.
Might be
I
helpful.
might have been sort of low down and didn't see any supporting actions, but really.
It doesn't translate to page 16. Oh.
It might be helpful too, for this sees the light of day, and it's readable. I mean, I know what you're trying to do, but it's a bit hard to read when the lines are overlapping each other.
Yeah.
And you're right, it doesn't translate, does it?
Interesting enough though, but you have the full report. That
Yeah.
was emailed. If you look at the full report, page 20, when you see balancing the world things, you'll see a positive economic impact comes out at 30%. A positive impact on the environment comes out at 31%. Significant more support on community social wellbeing, 22%. Cultural impact, 16%. So in the scheme of things, in the wholeness of the report, economic impact positive is pretty much equal, or one of the major things running through it. If you just look at the full wellbeing,
Where's that page 20?
page 20, but on the final report, on the full report, which was emailed to you by.
So it looks like this.
Right, good.
It's this page in the full report.
Okay.
It made me have a wry grin on page 16, more choice of affordable housings, the fourth highest, as being essential, and yet more smaller and multi-storey housing option in town has the second biggest cohort saying I'm actively opposed to it.
I know I can reflect on that from the qualitative work. It's just that that's not necessarily the solution that people want, but yeah.
They want a solution so long as it's not next door to them.
The conundrum of this role.
Isn't it, eh? Isn't it a dream? Any other questions, comments, councillors? Otherwise we'll get Rebecca to lead us forward to wherever we're going next. Yours.
Thank you, Christine. So I think Christine's going to leave us now.
Thank you, Christine.
Real opportunity to talk directly to Christine, who knows the research so well. And so any questions that you have about the full report or the presentation from today, she's able to answer far more eloquently than I am. So thank you, Christine.
You're welcome. And Rebecca, if there's anything else that comes up afterwards, please feel free to follow up. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Bye for now. Bye
Yeah.
So this in terms of where to now with this particular piece of work, we are currently still just finalising consultation with some of our stakeholders, including Otago. And so we sent out to you the full research report, and we sent to you an extract of the working draft of the so what. What does this mean? What does this mean in terms of a vision for Central Otago? How do we articulate the wellbeings in a Central Otago context? And I put something else in there too. I put in the piece about the key findings from the research, but you'll see that again in this presentation. And then the piece here, which was delivering on the aspirations, and I put that in to help explain those plots, because it's taken me quite some time to get my head around understanding the data on the plots and what it's actually saying. And so that was to help articulate those to get you thinking about what is this research actually showing us? What is it saying? Next steps for this is that we'll get that feedback from we'll get any feedback that from that final stage, and we'll come back to council for endorsement of the final piece of work. It's endorsement because it's from the people of Central Otago, so it's not an approval process, but we really need to have a buy-in to it for it to work. The second phase of the project was also about data. So now that about measuring success. And so now that we know what's important, how do we measure success towards it? And so that's the next phase of the district vision work, which is interesting. Well, and you've had Nick's presentation this morning from an economic development strategy perspective. How does that feed in? What does social wellbeing look like? What is environmental? So that's going to take some time yet, and we will bring updates accordingly. We haven't even put a project plan. So that's that. So then it's, how does this affect Central Otago District Council? And so this, well, if you can go to the next slide, please. Oh, sorry. So again, so it's key findings from the research. Now I've just put this in here. So it's a summary of what you've heard from Christine in quite a bit of detail, but what it's trying to do is to show you, when I've gone down into the community outcomes in a few slides, that I've tried to use what we've learned from the research, how they might influence the community outcomes. So it's just a reminder of what the key points were. I think you were next. And this is the vision that was sent out to you. Again, it's not quite finalised, it's still just that working draft. But like Martin said, this is common sense. This is, and as we've gone through this process, I know when Paula or I or others have just thought, this is it. We tested the data. You know, every time we had it, oh, is it? Are you sure? Because we are of this place. We work with the people of this place, and so when we read this statement, we think, yeah, that feels right. So it's nearly there, but it's not 100%. Wayne, if you could, I'm happy to be interrupted as all the way. The next is then how do we express this in the wellbeing for Central Otago? Again, still just that working draft, but it's about that, and the order of these are important, and that goes back to the point that we were just saying about how wellbeing is ranked and as a result of the data. So environment was number one, economic development, social wellbeing, expressions of culture. So how do you list the order that they're in? And we've been talking about it as a part of the community vision group and the project team, that none of these are in isolation. You can't just take the environment one and think about it without having it regard to the economic prosperity or social wellbeing or cultural expressions. And so that would be another point I'd make about this particular page. But again, we'll bring that back. Today's exercise, if we go to the next slide, please, is community outcomes. And so as part of the process for the long-term plan, councils need to determine their community outcomes. And what I've put up here is some advice from the Auditor General, just to show, and I've done the two political settings, because the bottom half of the slide are our existing political settings, which is the 2019 reintroduction of the wellbeings into the legislation, which is what our current legislation states. What the 2012 up there is just to show it still matters, even if we haven't had any indications at this point that the government will change the purpose of local government, but they could well. And I've just put up there what it was in the past to remind you that this work is still important, regardless of the purpose statement of the government. Well, and it's because even so that one up at the under 2012, these amendments remove the references to the social, economic, cultural wellbeing. However, council still get to report on the identified effects of their activity on community wellbeing generally, and so there's still that requirement in the legislation to give effect to what are your community aspirations and how you're giving effect to them, which is what this work is trying to do. Next slide, please, Wayne. So just a reminder, these are our existing community outcomes. So we have we've got them organised in those three headings of thriving economy, sustainable environment and connected community. And what we thought might be helpful here was just to give a couple of examples of other councils. So if we go to the next one, this is Kapiti. And Kapiti, so their community outcomes are place, people, partnership. So quite a different approach to what Central Otago has done, what many have done by moving away from wellbeings, and they've looked at more of what are the key aspects of how they do stuff or why they do stuff, and they've got the three people, place and partnership. Kapiti have got their strategic documents are really clear in terms of a line of sight between outcomes and what they do. And so I do think that there are some lessons from them that we can use, but this is just showing an example of a different way of doing things. Wayne, if you could go to the next one. This is Queenstown. They have a lot of community outcomes. So those green dots are all their community outcomes. Now,
It's a bit like Queenstown, isn't it? Confused, unreadable.
they've got a few mountain pictures in the background, which we kind of like.
How was that bad?
But I think what the community outcomes have come from is, you'll recall a few years ago they did a 50-year vision piece of work, and I think that's trying to connect back to that, but I'm not sure it quite hits the mark. And so, but that's just my humble. I think it's got some really good lessons in there.
In the basics right first.
Next.
It's on the bottom line. It's down.
Oh, sorry, if we could go back, one, that's a good point, is the connections to other things is great in this slide. So it's community outcomes, but then it has the flow on to what does this mean for other parts. So then, sorry, Wayne, if we could go back to the next one is our another neighbouring council, which is Waitaki, and you'll see their community outcomes. They've got 4: prosperous district, strong communities, quality services, and valued environment. And then underneath those priority community outcomes, they've determined what some strategic priorities are. Kapiti's done the same. It was just at a different level. So it's just examples of how other councils have presented their community outcomes. If you go, pardon me, next slide. So then the question is, what sort of structure do we want for our community outcomes? And today is not about what the words are. What this slide's trying to show is, if we use the approach of refreshing what we've got, we would go back to the research, especially those key findings, and make sure that these outcomes reflected the key findings from our from the research exercise. So we would add future focus, would add that safety to social wellbeing. We'd do that work and bring it back to you for formal approval. Or as another approach, and next slide please, use those, and this is again, it's not the words, it's just, we've just started. So do we use those Central Otago wellbeing statements and use them as our community outcomes? So we move from 3 to 4, and we take the statements, and I've started on the environment one, which was the state of wellbeing Central Otago is grounded in respect for and protection of the natural environment. The CODC will prioritise the environment by something really intelligent and awesome.
It seems to me, Rebecca, and I'd concur with Martin, there was nothing in this which surprised me, which is good. A little bit at odds with Nick's economic stuff, where I was like, oh, gee, I didn't expect to see that. This suggests to me that we're continuing on the same track because it's the right track. So a radical rethink, but perhaps enhancing what we've already got as a continuation rather than changing something because we haven't seen a lot of change. That's only my thoughts, but
when the LTP, the front end of the LTP is a time for councillors to consider this, because you landed, if you look at the last LTP, right at the very front, you have the regional identity, which is not really councils. It's so there's a bit of confusion in the last LTP or how that's all nested in there. So right up front, it's really good to get this bit right, because then this will help guide the actions that staff will take as we work our way through the LTP. It's an iterative process as well. So the LTP is really the only time you get to look at your, if you were to have a vision statement. Right now, what we have is a world of difference, which is in our council statement. That's the regional identity statement. So it's trying to get the framework right at the very front, that we know this is the outcomes that we are seeking as a council, and then everything feeds into that. You only get one chance normally every 3 years to look at that. And like the mayor said, sometimes that stays for 2 LTPs. We are stepping away from framing our future, so that the whole look and feel of the LTP, it would be our intention to move away from that and articulate the LTP in a slightly different way. But right at the front end, what we need to know is there general agreement around where you see the outcomes, what you see, what they are? Is it a reflection of what we've had previously, we've just updated, just so that it just sets the tone for the rest of the document?
These are philosophical statements which link back to what we actually spend the money on.
Yeah.
But philosophical
outcomes
statements
as well.
based on the research.
Yeah,
And then the KPIs and all that sort of stuff, will we measure
that comes
against?
back, that comes through the.
Yeah, and the prioritisation process as
Yeah.
well.
So this is basically real good picture stuff about how we feel about.
But in every activity statement, Mark, so save water.
Yeah, it comes.
You will then say water contributes to environmental and emotional well-being in these ways.
And the only reason, sorry, we're putting in front of you today is because this is what we've heard from the community. We now have solid information. This is what they've told us, as opposed to anecdotally where we probably we were 3-6 years ago. But now this is what this community has told us. Is there a way to reflect that? So, so we are, you as elected officials, your outcomes are aligned to what the community is telling us, and our actions that we take will be measured against those outcomes, and then our prioritisation process will fall out of that as well.
When Tracy and Tamer and I went to Oamaru last year, Waitaki District Council had like a really good one-pager, and we did bring that back here to council and we discussed it. And I think we agreed that we could probably come up with this one-pager once we'd done the district vision work. Just kind of a reminder.
Go back.
So that was, and it wasn't that. It wasn't that.
Can you one or is that there? Oh,
That's taken in their most recent document.
That wasn't it, was it? That wasn't.
No,
It was kind of circular. Yeah, and I'm sure that we took a photo of it. I just tried to look at my photos and I couldn't see it, but I know we took a photo of it and we talked about it quite a bit at the workshop. And it was really good because it had all of that linked in just to one pager, so that every time we'd come to a council meeting, we discussed it, that it should be at the top of our agenda every meeting, so that you always look into what's our vision, what are our priorities.
and that was from their 23-24 annual plan.
Oh, there you go.
Just looks cool.
Yeah.
Probably most of the same things.
Yeah.
I think that because this is they might have just seen it different.
Yeah.
It still has the 4 and it's still the same words. It's just in a different.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So we don't have a vision per se.
Yeah.
The default position here when you're driving the district, and that's not saying it's wrong, it's just what it is. It's a world of difference. I actually thought that was the council vision until something told me it's not the case. So then I got confused. But right at the front end, we're at the front end of the LTP. Now's the time. This doesn't have to be landed today, obviously. This will be iterative, but it's helpful for you to digest this, have a think about it, take the points that you've seen from others, councils, and so that we can start building that picture at the front end of the thinking.
Have you got the district division?
Go back with
The slide one way.
right at the front. Keep going. That one. So when I first got, so I've been working with Glenna, so Sajama strategist. Back and forth. So this is an articulation of the whole research report. This is essentially what it's saying.
And
So
are we
it's
going to
not-
have a catchy, like a vision is always a one line?
When I
And then with this and.
I was expecting a one-liner, you know, and this is what came through. This isn't wrong. This is a beautiful expression of the vision, the 50-year vision of Central Otago. If you can go to the very last page now, Wayne, the green one. Next one. Right at the top there, you got feet on the ground, eyes on the future, heart in the right place. And it's again, when it's said, you think, oh, it feels right.
Heart's in the right place, glass in the left end. Is that what's considered? Again, we're not putting anything in front of you, we're just saying this is a fait accompli. This is just drawn out of the research. Yeah, I mean, you could have distilled that down to grounded, focused, and community type. But it's just saying that if you wanted to, actually to evolve our vision, it is a number of workshops, because you all have to, develop it, buy into it, and then approve it. And so this stuff has just fallen out of the research, just like that one-page narrative. If that was a narrative that it's something that we would include right at the front end of the LTP, because that's where they typically sit, right at the very front end, because everything else falls out of it. And so this is just why, this sort of thing, not that this is just the words that have just landed, but you chat GPT that, as I have done, and you'll get a whole lot of different options out there.
Way the vision is articulated in that document, but I think when you say, what is your vision? It needs to be something that all of us and all of you and all of our community are like, it's this.
But you're not going to be able to express a vision for a whole community succinctly in one sentence, because as the research showed, people have different visions for their community. You can sell us it. You can sell, it's the old sausage and sybil routine, isn't it? You've got to sell the sausage but you need to have the sybil. The important thing about LTP is the buy-in from the people out there, not us.
No, that's right, but that statement there has been informed from the research, what the people have said. So that's a more accurate reflection of what it's condensing what people's views are and landed there.
That's also pretty good common sense.
Yeah, it's hard to argue with that.
It's not
arguing with the right places.
Yeah.
But the trouble is, what happens when feet on the ground, eyes in the future, hearts in the right place come up against an 18.4% increase in rates?
It's the eyes in the future.
It's not, I don't even worry about
Eyes in
I'm sorry?
It's the eyes in the future. Terrified.
But right now, all we have, right now, all we have, and it's not long either, is a world of difference.
I agree about that, but
It's not ambiguous.
One difference. The difference was a branding exercise. It was a branding exercise by a advertising/marketing company.
And we are not saying we want to go out and do a branding exercise.
No.
What we want to do is land the front part of the LTP, which will guide everything. So when people read it, those 6 people that choose to read the LTP, 5 of them will be the auditors. They'll see a logic flow from where you articulate the vision through to the narrative, through to the outcomes, through to the
It
prioritisation,
has to
through to
reflect the business we're in.
Yes, it does.
we don't want business speak either.
No, it's got to come with passion and heart, but it's got to reflect what our business is.
I think just a couple of points, just on the regional identity. So the regional identity values absolutely inform this work. And so, I went, when I applied for this job, I went back to those regional identity values and thought, do they resonate with me? And they absolutely, I could put my hand on the heart, say to Paula, please employ me. These speak to me. And I think if you go back and reread those values, that they absolutely will do that. And you'll see how they flow through into this research report. So that for me, they're a grounding, they're the foundations. And then this has been built on top of that. One of the catchphrases we thought about I'm gonna pull it out, David.
Oh, yeah.
We were coming up with a slow, thing, you know, what are we gonna call this, the campaign? And nobody who does bright ideas could think of anything. And I was in the supermarket and there were two young guys talking to each other. And one goes to the other, he goes, "How are you, mate?" And he goes, "Mate, I'm living the dream." And I loved it. I loved living the dream because.
And mate,
Yeah. But living the dream for me is what we are. We are living the dream here, but my colleagues, not everyone is. And so living the dream, we didn't use it.
I know, but remember, business statements say aspirational.
Yeah.
Otherwise, if they weren't aspirational, if they'd be modern economic depression, you don't want that.
Maybe it'll be better next year.
They're better next year.
That's a 10-year plan, that's the 1935.
Yes.
It's actually not far wrong, to be honest, Tim.
So we've gone, I've got.
No, but I guess to bring it back to home, it's just saying, we're at the front of the LTP. We've received this information from the community. There's some really good things in there. There's an opportunity to have a look at that against our current ones as well. And we can bring that back and work them up and give you a few options to have a look at. That as we come back for these workshops, we can continue to sort of try and get this bit of it right. So that then at some stage you can say, okay, actually we prefer to stay where we were.
Yeah.
Or we prefer to move to this new terminology or so on and so on.
That's what I was just thinking. So I was asking, what are those two approaches do we use? But I actually think we shape up both because it's not that hard. It's not, you know, we're thinking about community outcomes, which is what is CABC going to do about this wellbeing stuff. Then we could do it in both ways and see which works best once we've actually done the thinking behind
Yeah,
it.
or where the preferences.
Yeah.
Can I just add a little bit on the vision statement? So these three lines up here will prompt community feedback. So in the research that we did, this really stood out. People were practical in their responses. They thought about growth and prosperity, but in relation to what it would do to future generations, and they cared deeply about this place. So these statements make sense to the community. And once council has gone through and worked out these strategic priorities and how they want to deliver their wellbeing, then you can circle around and think about what's your statement that describes those strategic priorities, and then it will fit. But this is the community's one, not council. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
Because we're living. Subject to budgetary restraint.
Okay, now you've just I might move to Waitaki.
So,
All right. Thank you. Just before we close for councillors, a number of you today, and I have no idea, I've tried to work out why myself,